እኔ ከየትኛውም ሀገር ጋር ግጭት አልፈልግም። ከየትኛውም ሀገር ጋር አታካራ አልፈልግም። በሰላም የኢትዮጵያን ብልጽግና የሚረጋገጥበትን መንገድ መስራት ብቻ ነው የምፈልገው።
The new year has already brought a rapidly deteriorating security outlook to the Horn of Africa. The year kicked off with news of a memorandum of understanding signed by Ethiopia and Somalia's breakaway region of Somaliland, giving Ethiopia access to the port of Zayla and a stretch of coastline along the Gulf of Aden. According to Somaliland's officials, Ethiopia agreed in exchange to recognize Somaliland as a sovereign state. The reaction in Mogadishu was apoplectic. A Western diplomat briefed on the deal described it as a memorandum of misunderstanding. Ethiopia insists they did not agree to recognize Somaliland, the diplomat said. Discounting the power of Somali nationalism has never been a good bet. The leadership of Al-Shabaab, the terrorist organization that has bedeviled Somalia and its neighbors since the early 2000s, is aware of this fact. By condemning the port access deal, Al-Shabaab seeks to position itself as a champion of Somalia's territorial integrity and to undercut support for the federal government that has worked for decades with the United States and the African Union to try to stitch the Somalian state back together and subdue the extremists. This puts pressure on Somalia's president, Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, to push back on Ethiopia with ever more vigor.
Dr. Abiy Ahmed, የፌዴሪ ጠቅላይ ሚኒስትርና የጦር ኃይሎች ጠቅላይ አዛዥ በብረስ
To maintain power, Abiy must keep Ethiopia in a state of perpetual crisis. Enemies, real and imagined, will dominate public rhetoric. Ethiopia's lack of a port, Eritrea's independence and its success in a subsequent war with Ethiopia ended Ethiopia's outlet to the sea, and so Ethiopia turned to Djibouti, the independent city-state and port, and today Djibouti handles up to 95% of all of Ethiopia's inbound trade. To correct this and distract his population with a new crisis, Abiy is setting the stage for a claim to Zayla, a sleepy port in northern Somaliland just about 17 miles from the Djiboutian border. His supporters have begun to cite historic precedent. From the 16th to the early 19th century, Zayla was the main port serving the Ethiopian city of Harar and points even further inland. Zayla is also a focal point of Abiy's on-again, off-again discussion of creating a new Ethiopian navy, a military service that makes no sense in an otherwise landlocked country. France has successfully conducted training for a contingent of 30,000 Ethiopian Marines, equipping them for potential operational deployment in Somalia's water. While Ethiopia is a continental giant, after Nigeria, it has the largest population in Africa. Somaliland is far smaller in both size and population. Zayla itself is relatively isolated. The two nearest Somaliland cities, Boroma and Berbera, are 150 and 170 miles, respectively, away over rough terrain. It would take hours, if not days, for Somalia's military to muster its forces to repel an Ethiopian invasion. While Ethiopian forces would also face rough and barren terrain, they would only need to drive 160 miles to reach Zayla port. Underestimating the audacity and appetite for risk of Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is another bad bet. Unable to retain the support base that saw him through his war with the Tigray region and plagued by internal security and economic crises, he has turned to his port access project as a new and dangerous rallying point. While the Somali and Eritrean leaders met, Ethiopian officials reportedly held talks on military cooperation with Somaliland. Somalia is unlikely to attack Ethiopia while it grapples with Al-Shabaab, said Alan Boswell, Horn of Africa director at the International Crisis Group. But the deal could open fresh fissures in a turbulent region. Mohamud visited Eritrea last week and is preparing to travel to Egypt. The countries are Ethiopia's main regional rivals and have both expressed support for Somalia in the wake of the port deal. Abiy sees this as a legacy issue, said Boswell. If this deal with Somaliland falls through, Ethiopia will try to find a port somewhere else, so this is going to shape regional dynamics for years to come.